Hello, everybody. I just want to know if you guys can hear me. If you can, there's a little chat button on the bottom. You can just type in that you can hear me. So I'm just going to wait a minute because I can see there's a bunch of people joining. Hi, everybody. If you guys can let me know if you can hear me, that would be awesome. You can just kind of tap in the chat little box there. Don't worry, I can't hear you. I have you guys all muted. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Beth.
Oh, but there you are. There's your voice. So I actually don't know what I'm doing here, everyone. I have never used Zoom, so you're gonna have to bear with me here. I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my desktop. And can you guys all still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and mute you guys because I think I don't wanna have any background noise coming in. If you have questions, there is a little chat box that you can type in questions, and I'll be checking those periodically through there. Can you see me right now is the question, maybe? You could chat. Yes, you can see me. Awesome. Because I somehow clicked my little box and now I don't see myself. Oh, okay. So I really never used this before, so I don't know what I'm doing, but now I can see some of you guys from home, and I'm gonna go ahead and mute. I'm just gonna give it a couple minutes because there's only 22 of you in here and there's quite a few more registered. So you guys will just hang tight because I know it takes people a little bit to log in. This is exciting. I didn't think I'd be able to see you guys, but I can see some of you. Okay, I think I'll start at 6:05 because people are still trickling in, so just hang tight. Does anyone know if there's a way just to keep admitting people into this without me having to click a button once they're in the waiting room? Yeah, me neither. Oh, okay, good to know. I don't think I'll just keep clicking on these. All right, so if you've never used Zoom before, there is the option to type in the little chat box. If you guys have any questions, that's how I'm gonna go ahead and answer them, is through the little chat box, because I think it'd just be too much with all of us talking. To tell you a little bit about me while we're waiting for more people to trickle in, I've been a photographer now for over 10 years. Um, gosh, it's been even longer than that. I think I'm going on 11 or 12 years, but I got my start in portrait work, and I've done portraits, for the last 10 years, but then in the last few years, I've really branched off into doing more landscape and travel work. And I think that's really where my passion and my heart lies. And it's what I enjoy editing as well. But I'm going to show you how to edit landscapes, and we'll do some people photos too. I'm just going to go ahead and check and see if there's anybody else waiting to get in. I don't see anyone. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started and just keep an eye on this as I'm going. Can you guys see all my little boxes on my screen though?
For some reason, it's small on my screen. Is anyone else encountering that? Usually it fills my screen.
Is it, I'm small?
Yeah.
I can hear you. I haven't muted you yet.
I just unmuted myself. Yeah, like when like the Photoshop screen is super tiny, but I can't make it bigger, which is weird. Wonder. I'm gonna log out and try it again. Maybe I zoomed in with like something for the
Okay.
phone.
Is it tiny for anybody else? You have to double click her Photoshop screen, Danielle said.
Oh, let me try that.
All right, so hopefully we're getting this figured out. I know if you've never used it like me, you're not sure what you're doing. There's a lot of boxes. All right, my screen is full. It fills my screen. Okay.
I don't know that I'm seeing your boxes though, Beth.
You're not? That's okay.
I see you clicking, but I don't see anything. It's just the black.
Okay, that's good. I don't want you to see them because it's just like the participants and who I'm letting in. So I don't want you to see it, but I was just wondering if you could. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute all you guys. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Continue. And we'll go ahead and get started. I've got some notes that I'm gonna look at over here from time to time. I just want to talk a minute about why editing is so important. So I think that when I look at my photography, while I think I'm a good photographer, I think what makes my images really stand out is how I edit them. I think that that's what makes them get noticed. It's every time I post images to Instagram, I gain followers. I get thousands of views from hashtags because when people are looking at hashtags, they're seeing my images and they stand out. So editing is really important. I would almost say it's as equally important as taking a really good picture. It's like half and half. You have to have both pieces to make up a really beautiful picture. And then I just want to talk a moment about file type. So when you take a photo with your camera, you can choose RAW files or JPEG. And while I know it's really tempting to choose JPEG files because they take up less space on your memory cards, they are not as easy to edit. They don't retain as much information and they don't record as much brightness. So when you shoot in RAW, you have a lot more depth and a lot more information available. And that makes the images way more adaptable, way more easy to edit. When you'll see my images, you'll see I underexpose everything that I take. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to blow out the skies in my images, but I also know that when I come and I edit them, I can bring it all back through editing. Whereas if I were to overexpose it, I can't bring it back. Once you blow a sky, the sky is blown and you can't bring it back. So I always underexpose, and you'll see that in my images. And second thing I want to talk about is, hold on, I should check to make sure there's nobody else waiting over here. Second thing I want to talk about is why I edit in Adobe Camera Raw versus Lightroom, because I think a lot of photographers just start in Lightroom and then they never leave it. And Lightroom is wonderful. It does a lot of great things. You'll see it's the same thing as Adobe Camera Raw. Now, where Lightroom shines is that it has a better cataloging system for organizing your files. but I'm terribly unorganized and I don't have enough time to like edit my images, let alone organize them. So for me, I upload them to Adobe Bridge. And then from Bridge, I edit them in Adobe Camera Raw. And then from Adobe Camera Raw, I can open them immediately into Photoshop. Whereas I feel when I edit them in Lightroom and then I try to import them into Photoshop, the process just gets slowed down so much more. And so that's why I do it in Adobe Camera Raw. But even if you use Lightroom, you're going to see that all the stuff is basically the same. It just looks a little different. So I have a pre-recorded video. And what I don't know, so you guys are going to have to help me here, is if I play it, if you'll be able to hear it. Because I already have a whole editing course that I've written and recorded. And this is just a video explaining all the different tools that are in Adobe Camera Raw. But I don't know if when I play it, you're going to be able to hear the audio. So that's where I'm going to need your help. And if we can't, then I will just go ahead and explain it to you. Okay.
Watching it, even if you're somewhat
Okay.
familiar with.
Can you hear that? You guys could just type in I'll play it again. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and start this. This is about a 15-minute video and it's just explaining all the different tools in Adobe Camera Raw. And then once it's done playing, I'll stop it and pause and answer any questions you guys have at that point. If you can't hear it or it's not coming through, let me know. So I'm gonna go ahead.
In this video, I'm going to cover how to navigate Adobe Camera Raw. I recommend watching it even if you're somewhat familiar with the program, because you might pick up on some things that you did not know. There are a lot of little tricks in there and tools. So I use Bridge to upload and sort my pictures, and from here I can right-click and open in Camera Raw, or just double-click on my picture and it'll open it right into Camera Raw. If you don't use Bridge and you have your image already in Photoshop, you can come up to Filter and come to Camera Raw Filter, and it will bring your image into Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to go back and use the Bridge option because I wanted to use this picture. Okay, so now that we're in here, I'm going to go over these panels and then these tools. So here we have color and black and white. If you wanted to switch your image to black and white, you'd click on that. There are some pre-made profiles here you could click on, kind of see, like the landscape one. That does a pretty good job of editing it. And then you can, if you like one of these, you can always just make adjustments to it. I'm going to stick to Adobe Color. Here is our white balance. So if we wanted to adjust the temperature of the image, we would come here. They also have these pre-made ones. So if you said, no, I was in fluorescent light, then you could change it, or you can hit auto, see what it comes up with. I like to make my own adjustments, so I leave it as shot. And then I come over to these sliders here, and blue makes your image cooler, yellow makes it warmer. Here you can add in green or magenta. Down here we have more sliders. So here you can also just hit the auto button and see what they do for you. Sometimes I'll do this and then I'll come over here and I'll make adjustments to it because I don't think it ever gets it completely correct. And then to go back, you would just hit default. But this adjusts your exposure, up or down, contrast, up or down, highlights. You can bring your highlights down or up. Bring your shadows up or your shadows down. Bring your whites up and your whites down. Same with the blacks. Clarity is kind of like an HDR thing. It sharpens and adds in some blacks to your image. Or you can go the other way and it will kind of unclarify your image, I guess. If you had haze in your image, you could use this slider, or if you wanted to add in haze, you could use this. Here's vibrance and saturation. I know a lot of people get confused about what the two are. I prefer vibrance. Vibrance is kind of a smart adjustment. It will only adjust the colors that it feels need more saturation. So if I slide this, it's just adjusting the colors that it thinks could use a little bit more saturation, whereas if I slide saturation, it's going to blindly do all the colors. You can see the difference there. So anytime you've made adjustments and let's say you didn't like any of them, you'd come over here to these little lines up here and you can come back and hit Camera Raw Defaults. And that's going to bring you right back to where you started. In this panel, we have the curve panel. So here you can independently adjust your highlights and you can see the adjustments that it's making along the curve here. Bring up your darks, bring them down, shadows, lights, all of that goodness. You wanted to pick an actual point in the curve. Let's say I knew I wanted to bring this little area up. So I'd come over here and just drag. That's how you do that. Over here we have sharpening. So if you knew you wanted to just go ahead and add some sharpening in, you could do that. I generally do this later in Photoshop. Noise reduction, I do use this, and we will cover that a little bit later in a video. But it helps if you have, like, let's say you took a night shot and there's a lot of digital noise in your image, then you could add in some noise reduction, and it does a pretty good job of removing it. But we will go over that in detail later. Here we have hue, saturation, layer adjustments. This one here will adjust just the saturation. So let's say I wanted to make these blues more saturated. I just select the blues or desaturate them. Hue is the same concept, but it's, I'm going to change the hue of your color. So if I wanted to change the blue to a purple, I could do that. Make it green. Luminance is the lightness of a color. So let's say blue's doing a good job in my examples here. I wanted to make the actual blue darker, I would just come and drag this. Or if I wanted to make the color lighter, I could go that way. Here we have our split toning panel. So this is if you wanted to control the highlights and the shadows and make them different colors. So let's say I wanted to make my highlights yellow, I'm going to make my shadows blue, kind of a cross-processing technique. And then you'd come over here and you'd adjust the saturation to get the effect. I don't use this, but it's, I guess, nice to know that it's there. Lens correction, so you can come over here and click the Enable Profile Corrections. It's going to pull up what lens you used, and it's going to automatically make a correction to the image. It will take out vignetting. It will adjust the distortion from the wide angle lenses. I use the filter in Photoshop to do this, and I'm going to cover that with you later because you have a little bit more control. Effects, so if you wanted to add in some grain to your image to give it kind of that film look, you could do that here. Or if you wanted to add in a vignette or a light vignette, you could do that. Calibration, I don't touch this, I just leave that where that's at. Presets, so here, this is a kind of a newer feature, but they do have some presets in Adobe Camera Raw, and you can look at those and choose one if you like them. I don't use them, but they're nice to know that they're there. Or if you had bought any presets, this is where they would show up. Snapshot, this is going to record what you've done. I don't use this. Back to my Camera Raw defaults. All right, and then I'm going to come up here and we're going to go over the tools quick. So this is the magnifying glass. You can control it down here by zooming or zooming in or out. You can also use the shortcut Command plus or minus. It's control on a PC. This is your hand. So if I was zoomed in more on the image here, I could, okay, sorry about that. My computer kind of froze up there. So we were on the hand tool. So if I was zoomed in on my image and I grab the hand, it's going to just move me around my image. Up here we have the white balance tool. You can use this to sample an area on your picture and set the white balance. Sometimes you can use this if you have a picture of a person and you put the white dropper in the white of their eye, it's supposed to do a good job. Or if you use a gray card and you've had middle gray that you could sample. I don't use it, but it's good to know that it's there. This is color sampler tool. I also don't use this, so I'm not going to cover it. Targeted adjustment tool is a really neat tool, and I'm going to show you what that is. So you click on it, and let's say you wanted to just adjust the sky. So it's going to target this area. So you put your mouse there. When you right click, you can choose what you're going to adjust. You're going to adjust the curve, the hue, the saturation, or the luminance. So I'm going to start with the curve to show you that. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to click and drag if you wanted to brighten it, or the other way if you wanted to darken it. Now let's say I wanted to change the hue. You could do the same thing here. You would click and drag. The saturation. So it's a really neat tool, and it's really handy to be able to adjust things independently like that. This is the crop tool. I don't crop in Adobe Camera Raw. I do that later in Photoshop, but it's nice to know that it's there. This is the straighten tool. So if your horizon was a little bit off center, you could just double click on this and it will try and get a crop to make your horizon level. If you wanted to try and do it yourself, you would click on the tool, drag your line, and then it would crop your image. This is the transform tool. I don't use this. I use other tools within Photoshop, and I'm going to cover that with you guys. Spot removal, I do use this a lot. So I'm going to zoom in on my image. I'm sure I can find a spot somewhere up here. Yep, there's one. So over here, you can adjust the size, the feather, and the opacity of it. You can also say if it's going to be a clone or if it's going to heal. I just leave it on heal. You can also use your bracket keys to adjust your brush size. So I'm going to come over here and select that. And then what it does is it selects something nearby that it thinks it should mimic. Now, if it doesn't do a good job and it picks the wrong spot, you can move this around, which is really neat. This is red eye removal. I also don't use this, but I guess it would come in handy if you had demon eyes in your pictures. Adjustment brush. So I use these a lot. And these are a really powerful tool. I'm going to come over here and reset this so it's back to 0 here. So what you can do with adjustment brushes is that you can paint on an effect in any area of your image. So let's say I wanted to bring up the shadows in this area and make this the color more vibrant. So I brought my exposure up a little bit, brought my shadows up, and I brought up my saturation. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to paint this effect. So you can make any of the same adjustments that you made in the first panel with your brush. So let's say I wanted this area cooler. Now, even after you've brushed it on, you can still make adjustments. So you can also make it sharper and add in noise reduction. You can add in a color to your brush if you wanted. So this little dot represents the brush you just made. Now, If you wanted to erase something that you did, you would come and click on this, and then you'd come in and erase. If you wanted to make a new brush, you would click on New. Now let's say I wanted to add a color to the sky. To reset the brush back to 0, you can click on these little lines up here. Let's say I wanted to make it kind of red or something. I would come in. Oh, I'm painting over my area, but then you're going to come back and erase. Down here, you can control the size of your brush, how much it feathers, the flow, and the density. I keep the feather up pretty high so it's not such a blunt effect. Right, I'm gonna delete that brush. Okay, and those are adjustment brushes. Up here we have a graduated filter, which is pretty much the same thing as a brush, but it's just more of a filter and it's just controlling an area. I'm just going to show this because I don't know how to explain it well with words. But let's say I wanted to do this on the sky, and this is where I will use them. So you would come up here and pull down, to where you wanted the effect to go. I still have my pink on down here. Yep. So then, you can make more adjustments to it if you wanted. The options are really endless with the things that you can do with the filters and the brushes right in Adobe Camera Raw. This is a radial filter. So you would just kind of select a spot, and then it's going to affect the area outside of it. I don't use these, but I need to know if they're there. This is preferences. I don't use that. This is also just to rotate your image. This is to toggle full screen mode. So if you wanted to see before and after, you'd come down here on these little, and you can click on them for different views. So there's the before and after side by side. There it's going to give you half and half, top to bottom, and back to your, oh no, that's half and half too. Just to swap your before and after settings. Still have this. So that's just if you wanted to kind of quick cycle and see what you've done. This is copy current settings to before. I don't use that either. So then when you were done and you've made all of your adjustments, you would just come over here and you'd hit open image, and it would bring your image into Photoshop. And that's kind of the basics of Adobe Camera Raw. You will learn more and catch on as you watch the walkthrough videos of the images that I'm going to edit. All right, did everybody hear that and retained it all? I'm going to check to see if you guys have any questions. Let's see what the chat is. Okay. Is there a difference between adding first the raw in ACR and then to Photoshop and add it in Photoshop and use a Camera Raw filter? So once you bring your image into Photoshop, it's then converted into a JPEG. So if you are doing edits within Photoshop and then you go into Camera Raw, it's not a raw file. So you want to kind of go from Bridge into into Adobe Camera Raw, if that makes sense. All right, if nobody has any other questions, I'm going to get started editing some of these pictures. Oh, there's one more question. Oh, thanks. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this image. This is Bridge here. This is what I use to upload my pictures and to sort them. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on it and hit Open in Camera Raw.
That doesn't look very good. All right, so this is my completed edit. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back to where the original image was. And to do that, I just hit Camera Raw Defaults. Oh, there's kind of a lag here. Hopefully this doesn't keep up. So this is what my image looks like straight out of camera. You can see it's underexposed, and I've told you before that the reason I do that is so that I can retain the sky. Because if I don't underexpose, oftentimes you'll blow the sky. All right, so right away, well, I'm gonna bring up the exposure just a little bit, but I wanna get rid of all these spots that I see. So I'm gonna come up to my spot remover and just click on them. And what it does is it samples part of your image and then fills it in. If you don't like where it went, you can just move it around. I am notorious for having a dirty sensor. I shoot all prime lenses, and so I'm switching them a lot. And in doing so, I think I end up with a really dirty sensor. All right, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this, but now you guys can see where all the different little spots were and how I edited them. To get back to my panel, I just kind of click on the hand, and that always brings me back here where I want to be. So I already brought the exposure up a little bit. What I want to go ahead and do now is bring my shadows up so I can bring some light onto this area. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger here for you guys. I have it completely full. There we go. Let me see if I do. All right, so from bringing my shadows up, I usually will bring down my highlights just a little bit. And what that does is just make sure that the highlights in the sky haven't been blown. But from here, I want to look at my image, and this is what I do when I edit an image. So when you take an image, you are thinking of a whole image. It's one thing. But when I edit an image, I think of my images in parts. And that's how I want you guys to look at your images when you're editing them. How I break them into parts is in several ways. I will look at my sky is usually one part, you know, my foreground and other things like that. But what I'm also looking for is all the different colors I have. So I break them into colors, and then I'm looking at all the different light I have. Like obviously there's different light in the sky, and there's light hitting these rocks here, which is different. And then down here, there's shadows. So I know I want to break this image into 3 different parts, this part, and then this part. And that's what I would recommend doing, because I don't, at this point now, I'm not going to just make a bunch of changes to the whole image. I'm going to go in now and use brushes and filters to make the changes that I want, so I can just affect certain parts of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and, how do I get that out of here? Grab my filter, I'm sorry, hide video panel. Nope, that didn't do it. The panel's in the way right now of where I want to grab my stuff. There, I moved it. Okay. All right, so I've got my radial filter here. I'm gonna come back over here and hit reset. And then I'm gonna go ahead and drag this down. I haven't made any adjustments to it yet, but I know that roughly that's where I want it to be. And you're gonna wanna drag it past your spot. It's not gonna have much effect here because it is gradual. And if it had some effect there, you could go ahead and brush it off. So now I want to add in just a little bit more magenta to the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. See that making a little bit more magenta in the top there. I know I want there to be more contrast in this. I'm going to bring my whites up just a little bit. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a brush on this as well, but I just wanted to get that magenta in there and have it be a gradual effect. So now I'm going to come over here and click on my brush. I'm going to go ahead and hit reset. And now I'm just gonna do one change to it so that I know where I'm painting it. So I'm gonna bring my whites up and just go ahead and paint. You make your brush smaller with your bracket keys. So I'm just gonna go ahead and paint this on. Let me see a big spot I missed. All right. And if you wanted to see where you can always hit the mask button, like I can see I missed a couple spots, but I don't think it's a big deal. So now I'm gonna just make some adjustments to my sky. I'm just gonna kind of play with it. I'm gonna add in some more contrast, play with the highlights and bring them down just a little bit. I feel like I missed a spot right here. I'm gonna bring my texture up and my clarity up. And what that does, I'm gonna go really extreme so you can see, but you can see that it's kind of really making some depth within the clouds. Problem with this is that it adds in some noise. So to counteract that, I would come over here and hit noise reduction and just kind of smooth that out. Now I know I also want to make this much more saturated. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the saturation up. Play with my highlights here just a little bit. Didn't actually record what I was going to do for all of these because I feel that it would be better if I just kind of winged it. So that looks pretty good for the sky. I'm now going to go ahead and work on this part here of the landscape. So I want to do a new brush. So I'm going to hit new. I'm going to go hit reset. And now what I want to do for this part is make this warm, because you can kind of see that there's warm light hitting it. And I want to make it a little bit brighter as well. So I'm going to go ahead and make my brush warmer. I'm going to bring my exposure up just a little bit and start there and see if I like what it looks like. You can see that that really warmed that up. I even want it a little bit warmer, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. I'm going to bring my whites up. I'm going to add in some contrast. I might even bring the exposure up just a little bit because that contrast kind of darkened it. Maybe bring my shadows up. Still want this warmer, so I'm going to keep dragging that. Maybe add in a little bit of saturation to that as well. All right, so now I want to address this area down here. I want it to be darker, but I want the sand here to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to reset my brush again. Hit, oh no, it just undid all of my, there we go, got it back. Okay, so now I want to do a new brush. Oh, why is it doing that? Okay. All right, so here's my new brush. I just clicked there. I need to reset this. And what I want to do here is see if I bring up the whites, if that will make my sand be brighter. Not doing much yet. Play with it a little bit more. There you can see that really brightened it. And then I can bring down the shadows on these other parts. You can even bring up the exposure just a little bit. But I want to keep the shadows in these little shrubs. I don't know what you'll call them. All right. So that's all I'm going to do for brushes. Now I'm just going to go back to my sliders over here and just kind of make a couple more tweaks to it. I'm going to add in the whites, a little bit of contrast. Bring my blacks up just a little bit, and I'm going to add in some vibrance. So you can see, you know, that didn't take me very long. I was able to really change how it looked. Let's see. Clicking the before and after button and it's not doing anything. But you get the idea there. I don't know why it's not showing the before and after. Do you guys have any questions about that specific edit? Okay, I don't see any questions, so that's good. All right. So I can just bring this back to where it was to show you guys how much changes we made to that. That was what it started at. I go back, and that's all the changes we made. And you know, that was pretty simple and pretty fast edit. All right, and then if I wanted to keep editing it in Photoshop, I would hit open image, but we're done with that one. All right. Waterfall. Sorry, my images are so tiny down here. I gotta make them bigger. All right, now we're gonna do this one. All right, and this is where I've edited it to this point. I'm gonna go ahead and bring it back to the camera raw defaults. All right, and you can see in this one that I almost blew the sky, but I was able to retain it, and even you can see how underexposed it was. But still it's there, and so I have it to work with. Right away, I know I wanna bring my shadows up because I'm having a hard time seeing most of it. And you know, that makes a huge difference right there. And I know I wanna bring my highlights. I don't wanna bring them too down. Let's try the targeted tool up here and click on that, the curve. Let's see. I just bring that part down. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna make it a little bit more saturated too. And then I could also darken it a little bit more with the luminance. There we go, that looks good. All right, so now I'm going to make just a couple adjustments here. I'm gonna bring my whites up. And these are usually typical things that I do. I usually bring my shadows up, I usually bring my whites up. I usually bring my blacks up and then add in some contrast. And then from here, we're gonna do some, actually, I'm gonna deal with the green here. So you can see the trees, you know, this was early summer when the trees are still kind of greenish yellow in color, but I wanna change that. So I'm gonna come over here to my hue saturation layer adjustments. And I'm gonna come to hue, and I'm gonna choose the yellows. Now you would think greens because it's kind of more green, but it actually is a yellow. So when I drag this, I can change the color of that. You can see it's making it more green. And then, I mean, that's overkill, but then I could come over here and reduce the saturation of it. Still a little too green for my liking there. But that's also, you would, you know, the film looks really popular with editing, and that's how people are achieving that with Lightroom presets or in Adobe Camera Raw. They're just adjusting the hue of their yellows and sometimes your greens within this panel. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and do a brush. I'm gonna reset this. And I wanna get a brush to kind of bring up the light in the water here. So I'm gonna do my whites. I'm gonna go over myself too there. And I'm gonna go over the rocks. All right, I'm gonna do another new brush. And this time I just kind of want to add some more contrast. So I'm gonna bring my shadows down. I might adjust this later and just add in some contrast here to these rocks. And then the sides over here of this image are kind of dark. So I'm going to do another new brush, reset, and I'm just going to bring the exposure up. Oh, that's too much though. All right, and then I am going to do one more brush. I want my exposure up. I'm just going to bring it up just a little bit here on the rocks. And then myself here. All right, so if I wanted this to have kind of a matte look to it, which is really popular also, I'm gonna come over here to my panels and I can go into my curves and my tone curve panel. And to get the matte look, what you're gonna do is drag up this, this line way at the end of the point, and you can see how it's kind of adding in, I don't know how you would explain that, kind of a film look, but you would come and drag a point down right about here. This is kind of in your shadows. And then sometimes I'll bring up my highlights. So really it's 3 different points upon the curve. And then you can come and make the effect greater or less by just adjusting the little last curve there. Now I'm just gonna make a couple more adjustments just in general to this. Still a little dark. I would just maybe bring up my exposure. I'm gonna bring the highlights down just a little bit because I feel like they're clipping. And then I would just probably add in some vibrance. So you can see that was a really quick, fast edit. And what's really important is to just break it down into steps and using your brushes. So does anybody have any questions about that edit or anything I've said so far? Is there something you don't? Yes, so the question is there a reason you don't start with a global exposure adjustment first? So sometimes, you know, I do just bring up my shadows and my whites just to make the exposure more bright, but I do most of my adjustments with brushes because yes, you have more control over your image, because when you take a photo, it's not all going to be one color, it's not all going to be one light. And so if you're using your brushes, then you can really control the final outcome of your image more. In some of your other water photos, did you set your camera settings for long exposure or did you add in long exposure later? So I know I usually just do long exposures within my camera. It's pretty hard to make water look realistic within Photoshop using the tools just to make it look soft like that. I've tried, but it's best to just do it in camera. All right, so I'm gonna hit done on that one. All right. Okay, now I'm gonna edit a person so you guys can see what that looks like. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this back to camera raw defaults. And you can see, I mean, this image is underexposed too, not terribly so, but enough. But I'm gonna go ahead now and just bring the exposure of this one up right away. A neat trick for editing people is if you come into your hue saturation layer adjustments and go to your luminance. Now this generally works best with people with fairer skin, but it does work with all types. You can slide your orange, and if you look at her skin, you can see it's brightening her skin. And you can also play with the reds, but you have to be careful with that because you can see it's doing stuff to her lips too. So I usually don't do the reds a whole lot. but I usually do come in and bring my oranges up just to whiten the face a little bit. All right. So from there, I'm gonna bring my whites up. What I wanna make sure is that I'm not blowing my whites. If this is the histogram up here, if I click on this, you can see it's now showing me the spots that are blown in my image. This is fine. I don't care if the highlights are blowing in her hair. I just don't want to really blow out the detail in her shirt. If you were to click on the other button, it'll show you where shadows are clipping. So that's a neat little trick to know too, if you want to make sure you're not blowing out part of your image. All right, and so from here, I'm going to go ahead and work on brushes. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on her. She's got just a little red splotch here on her forehead. I'm going to take care of the spot brush. And kind of one right there too. See that sampled her eyebrow there? That's not going to work. So I got to take this, move it around. All right, that looks great. And so from here, I would address, a few things. I'm going to want to soften her skin, make her eyes pop, and then I can whiten her teeth and make her lipstick pop a little bit too. To do that, we're going to go into our brushes, and I will go ahead and start with the skin. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. So this texture slider here is actually new. They introduced that last year, and it's really great for softening skin. Normally I would go into Photoshop and use portraiture to soften skin, but if I'm just doing a quick edit on something, I can just come in here and do this. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this on her skin here. You can't see it just yet because I don't have it turned up very high. I will make that adjustment in just a second so you can see the difference. Let me see my mask here. I got most of her face. Okay, so if I drag it way to the left, you can see, let me zoom in just a little bit more. You can see that that's really softened her skin. It's gone way too far because now you can't see her freckles, but I would just go and then on it, drag it back to a spot where I could still see her freckles. I think that looks good. So now her skin, just looks a little bit more smooth. And then from there, I'm gonna edit her eyes. So I'm gonna do a new brush. I'm gonna hit reset. And I kind of wanna make, the colors in here pop and the highlights in her eyes pop. So I'm gonna bring my highlights up, my whites up a little bit, and just kind of paint that on. Didn't make a huge change. Let's see. Oh, I don't know what that did. That was on the spot brush. I don't want that. Trying to see if I make changes to this, if I'm on the right brush here. Sorry, just bear with me. Oh, there's just a lag here. I see what's going on. All right, so I'm going to add in some contrast. And bring my blacks down to add in some depth. Oh, that's too much. Sorry, there's kind of a lag here with my computer. And I want to bring the saturation of her eyes up. All right, so I think that looks good for her eyes. If I wanted to come in and whiten the whites of her eyes, I could do that too, but I think they're actually pretty white, so I'm just going to leave them there. Another thing I could do is we'll add a new brush, hit reset, If I wanted to just add in some highlights to her face, I could go ahead and bring my whites in and kind of paint on spots where there might be some highlights, like on her cheeks. There we go. All right, now if I just wanted to do a little bit to her lipstick, I'd hit New. And I would just bring the saturation up on that. And just make that pop that way. If I wanted to whiten her teeth, I would go to New, hit Reset, and just bring the saturation down. Her teeth are pretty white, so this isn't going to make much of a difference, but just for future reference, if you have somebody with really yellow teeth. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. I really want to make the golden light in her hair pop. So I'm going to do another brush. I'm going to hit New. And I'm going to crank up the temperature and paint that on here. So you can see that's really made her hair look really golden. And then I want to come back to my adjustment panel. And I just want to change the color of this green. So I'm going to come over to here, my hue saturation layers, and play with my yellows again. I just want it to look more green. So I'm dragging it that way, but then I'm going to come over to saturation and kind of desaturate it. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, I don't think I would do much more to this edit. You know, you could always go in and make it look matte again, but I'd maybe add in just a little bit of vibrance. If I wanted to change the color of her skin, if her white balance didn't look right, I could play with this. I could warm her up just a little bit and decrease her magenta just a smidge. And then you can also come over here and play around with like daylight. That looks terrible. See what it does. Shade makes her look too warm, but the custom is perfect. And that's how I edit people in Photoshop. You just use your brushes to kind of fine tune their skin and their eyes, and then make any adjustments you want in the panel over here. Does anybody have any questions about that? What is the difference? Okay, I've got a few questions. What is, from the previous example, what is the difference between texture and clarity? Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. Texture I know softens, but I wonder if you go the other way, I think it just kind of sharpens. So you can see that that sharpened it. Clarity, you can see it's more like it adds in blacks, whereas the texture didn't. And you're not going to want to use clarity to soften skin because it looks terrible. All right, when I underexpose, I feel like the image isn't as sharp as it should be. How do you seem to avoid this? I don't know that I ever have that problem, but if your image wasn't as sharp, you could always then come back in here and add some sharpening this way. Through the detail is the sharpening, and then using the clarity or the dehaze. You said you sharpen in Photoshop. Do you use high pass filter for that? Yes, when I am in Photoshop, I rarely do hardly any sharpening to my images. I actually do a lot of softening to them. So when you look at my landscapes and stuff, I want them to kind of look more painterly than like crunchy sharp. So I rarely actually sharpen my images, but if I do use the high pass filter in Photoshop. All right, so we're done with that one. Come over North Shore, okay. All right, now I'm gonna edit this one for you. Go ahead and open in Camera Raw. All right, so this was my final edit. I'm gonna go ahead and hit camera raw defaults and bring it back to where it was. Again, you see it's underexposed. I had to because I wanted to capture the sky. You can see I almost blew it out over here. So to start, you know, like I normally do, I just bring up my shadows. I'm gonna bring down my highlights just a little bit so I don't blow the sky over here. And I'm gonna bring my blacks up just a little bit. When you bring up the blacks, you can see it, I don't know, it softens it too much. So to counteract that, I usually add in contrast. All right, so now I'm gonna divide this in two parts like I talked about before by using my brushes. So I'm gonna come here. I wanna make these fall colors pop. So I'm gonna hit reset and I'm gonna crank my temperature up, my yellow up. And I'm just gonna start painting on the yellow parts. And you know, you can always just make parts that weren't yellow, yellow too if you feel like it, but I'm just gonna stick to what was to begin with. Just some random patches back here. Now I would just kind of bring the saturation of that specific brush up. Oh, that's way too much. And I could also bring the whites up. That's gonna make them kind of stand out just a little bit more. Now I want to change my greens too. So I'm going back to my panel here and I'm doing the hue change that I showed you guys earlier. There, I'm gonna switch my greens. I'm gonna make them more of a blue-green. You can see the difference that that made. Now I want to edit my water. So I'm gonna come over here to brush, hit reset. And I wanna make the water more blue and I wanna brighten it. So I'm gonna bring my temperature down and my whites up and start there and then make adjustments. So you can see that that's painting it and it's making it blue. And you know, if you miss a spot or go over a spot, you can always come up here and hit erase and erase it from where you want to erase it. So now I could make it a little bit more saturated if I wanted to. I could make it, you know, blue-green if I wanted to. You can see some spots here. I mean, I'm not going to take a ton of time to make this perfect, but you know, you would kind of zoom in and address all those little areas. All right, now I want to deal with the sky. I think I'm going to try a filter and see if that works first. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag it down. And I want this to have a blue color to it too. So I'm going to bring the temperature down. And I'm bringing the highlights down too because this part is starting to clip just a little bit. And then I could also add in some contrast to give it some depth. It's just a little too dark. I'm bringing my exposure up just a little bit. All right. Now I'm gonna paint on some adjustments on the rocks here. So I want this to be a little bit more colorful and brighter. So I'm gonna bring my saturation, whites, and exposure up. I always think it's best to just make a couple adjustments so you can brush on and see what you've made and then come over here and kind of tweak them a little bit more. So add in some contrast. I'm going to go back now that I've done all of the brush work that I want to do and do some final adjustments because the image is still just a little bit too dark. On here. So this is the curve, but if you hit parametric, you're going to get a slider kind of look. So I could bring up my lights and then you can see it's making adjustments on the curve for you. I want to add in more contrast. Oh, that went too far. Keep watching because this little spot right here keeps kind of wanting to blow out. And then I would boost the vibrance of this just a little bit. Of course, that made my water too blue, but then I would just go back and change the vibrance of the water, or I could come in and just do a brush, and maybe I will do that quick. We'll just do a brush, reset, and we'll just kind of turn up the saturation on the trees here. Oh, that doesn't look good. All right, so that is how I would edit that image. And again, you know, that's pretty quick. It's just all about dividing your image into parts and using your brushes. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. Okay, so I'm gonna hit done. And then I have just kind of one more image that I want to show you guys, just some more things that you can do in Camera Raw. So this is like way underexposed, but I just wanted to show you like how powerful this is when you shoot in RAW. If this was a JPEG file, there's no way I would be able to make the adjustments I'm about to make. So shoot in RAW all the time. Just bring lots of memory cards. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring my shadows way up. I'm gonna bring my exposure up. I mean, just look at how incredible that is. I think that now I can just see all, you didn't even know there was people there. But what happens when an image is really underexposed and you bring the light back into it is you end up with a bunch of digital noise, and you can see that here. So to counterbalance that, you'd come into noise reduction here, and you would just drag your luminance. I'm gonna drag it all the way so you guys can just see kind of the extreme. You can see that what it does is it kind of softens your whole image, which isn't bad, but like I'm losing detail in the faces of these people. So you wouldn't want to go that high, but it does a really good job of removing that. And then just some other tricks that you can do within Adobe Camera Raw, which I haven't gone over yet, is if you come into your curve panel here and you come to your points, now you can actually play with the colors. Now the RGB curve is going to just adjust the light in your image. You know, up here is going to be your highlights, and this is your midtones and your shadows. So you can see when you drag different points that they do different things in those parts of your area of your image. But if you come over here and you change to a color, now you're just going to be controlling a color. So this can be kind of fun, like, because this image would maybe be fun if I gave it kind of a retro edit. So I'm going to go to blue, and I'm going to bring, oh, I'm going the wrong way. I want to add in yellow to my highlights. So I'm bringing that down. And then I could add in some blue to my shadows. And you could come into red. You know, you could add in pink. If you go that way, it's green. I just wanted to show you guys because that's another, and then there's green and magenta too. That's just kind of a fun little trick to play with too, to change your colors. All right, and then there's just a couple more things I want to show you just to kind of help you speed up your workflow. So if you have, you know, a couple images that you want to edit, let's say they're similar, obviously these aren't, but I can click on them both, hit open in Camera Raw, and I've got my one image here. I make sure I'm clicked on it and then hit Command A or Control A if you're on a PC. And then you're going to come over here and right click. And after you've already edited this image, you could just say sync settings. Now it's going to ask you, what do you want to sync? Here are all like the sliders. And then down here would be your brushes and your filters. So I would hit OK. Okay. And now it's going to sync this. It's slow, that's why it's got that little exclamation point. But it would, ooh, see, it synced it to that, and now it looks terrible. But that's one way that you guys can speed up your workflow. So if you had a bunch of images that were all taken at the same time, same light, same color, and you want the same edit on all of them, you would just come over here, make your edits, hit Control A, and then right click. I did not like what I did because it slowed this down. It's a spinning wheel of death. Okay. One other way you can speed up your workflow is if there's always things that you consistently do when you edit, is you can create your own preset. So you come over, this is where your presets live, but let's say you've already made your adjustments and you want to say that this is something you do all the time. You would come over here and click on these little lines and hit Save Settings. And then it's going to ask you what you want to save. Generally, you don't want to save the brushes and stuff, but you would just want to save the adjustments and hit Save. And then you'd name it Ferris wheel, and you want it to live in your settings, hit Save. And now when you come over here, you can see it's in my user presets. You can also do the same with brushes. So if there's a brush that you use all the time that you love, you would just hit New Local Correction Preset and then save it, just like we did with the preset. So that is how I edit in Adobe Camera Raw. I want to talk just a little bit about what you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in Adobe Camera Raw, because there are limitations. While I love Adobe Camera Raw, I rarely stop editing an image there because I think that there's a lot more that you can do within Photoshop to really enhance your images. And I'm just going to show you guys a couple examples of things that I've done within Photoshop. So things that I like to do within Photoshop are composites. So, you know, in this image, I hadn't brought a tripod with me, and so I had my husband take a picture of me, and then I went and I took a picture of him, and voila, now we're together in the picture. And composites you can't do in Adobe Camera Raw. You can't also change colors, so I can, you know, just change colors globally. This is an oil paint filter. I love using this, and you can see when I zoom in, you can see the detail on it. There's all these kind of artistic filters that you can use within Photoshop. Here's another example of stuff that you can do within there. This is also the oil paint filter, but you can also notice the trees over here. I wanted them to kind of curve into each other to create more of a, I don't know, more of a beautiful center comp. And so I'm able to, you can move things within Photoshop. I can curve the trees. This is like an extreme edit here that I've done. This was 2 different pictures here that I took, and then I merged them into this. I added a ton of light. I changed colors. I added in some waterfalls with Photoshop brushes. Here's another example of a composite. So I think when people think of composites, they usually think of like the kind of sci-fi stuff that you see people doing on Instagram, you know, where there's crows flying out of their head or whatever, but that doesn't have to be how a composite is. It can also just be parts of your shoot. Like, so this image I took, but these elements were all present when I took this picture. I just took them out of a different picture and put them in here to frame the image. You're limited in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw with what you can remove as far as like hair strands, and here I removed horses, but that took a while, but it's something that you can do. And there's just a lot more control that you can have within Photoshop. Here's an example of me I use a cloud brush to add in some more clouds on the water here. There's all kinds of brushes. There's like a whole world out there. If you go to brusheasy.com, there's free brushes, there's cloud brushes, there's, let me show you another example here. There's snow brushes. So I added snow. You know, you can add rain. There's just a lot of, this is a fun thing that you can do. Also, you can move mountains. So look at the hills or the mountains in this, and then look at how I moved them up and made them bigger. That is through the liquify tool. And when you hear people talk about that, they're usually using it to make people skinnier, but I use it to enhance landscapes because I think it's kind of fun. So there are a lot of different tools within there. And if you guys wanted to learn more about how to use Photoshop, you guys can check out my Photoshop editing course. I do have a link to that in my Instagram profile, and I can send you guys a link to it in an email that might have it pulled up here too, just to show you. But this is my Photoshop course. I have it on sale right now because I know everybody's struggling, but it's 6 hours of videos, 25 episodes, and 25 Photoshop actions that I've created and that I use all the time. And now I just want to open this up and see if you guys have any questions. It can be related to editing, it can be related to photography, just kind of an open Q&A, whatever you would like to know. I'm here to answer. Can you import directly from camera to Bridge? Yep, so when I plug in my, my memory card into my laptop, I'm importing directly into Bridge. A prompter will pop up and it'll ask you what program I want to use, and I always just select Bridge. Yes, I cover composites thoroughly in my Photoshop class. I love photography, but I almost love Photoshop more because I love seeing that I can take an image and I kind of think of it as my canvas. And then I think of how I can paint it and make it different and enhance it. All right. Are there any other questions? Well, if there's no other questions, I'll wait just a minute because I know you guys are typing them in. Okay, thanks for hosting. Do you swap lenses or travel with one? So I swap lenses. I switched to Nikon. Oh no, I was shooting Nikon and I switched to Sony about a year ago. And it was so expensive. And so I decided, well, I'm just gonna buy prime lenses because, you know, they're cheaper and they're lighter. And now I have about 5 different prime lenses and I'm constantly switching them. I do at some point hope to get like a 24 to 70, but because I'm out and I'm doing a lot of traveling, I try I mean, if you've ever carried a 70 to 200 around your neck, it's really heavy. And so if you have a prime lens, it's just a little lighter and it makes it a little easier. Can you do HDR, like mixing exposures in Adobe Camera Raw? You can't do HDR in Adobe Camera Raw as far as I'm concerned. You can do that in Photoshop, and I do cover that in my photo editing course as well. What is your most used landscape lens? I would say probably my most used landscape lens is my 24. And not because it's my favorite, although I do love it, but it is my lightest. It's this tiny little pancake lens. And so sometimes I'm, you know, taking my camera bag and I'm going and my camera and I'm going on like 12, 15-mile hikes. And so I'm going to pick one lens, I'm going to commit to it, and I want it to be my lightest, kind of most versatile. And I feel that 24 is a good focal length. If I find it's not wide enough for me, then I will take a few different shots and then merge them together into a panorama. I have a 14 millimeter that I use a lot as well, but between my 14 and my 24, those are my favorites. Is there a huge difference between crop sensor and full frame? There is not. The camera companies want you to believe that there is. You aren't going to have, where you're going to notice the difference most would be in something like nighttime photography. That's where you'd really want a full frame because just of the resolution and stuff. But unless you're doing this, you know, as a career choice, I would stick to a crop sensor camera because they're cheaper and the lenses are cheaper. And with how intelligent cameras have become, there is not a huge difference anymore. There used to be, but now I think that they're just as equally capable of performing as well as full frame. I mean, you do lose some resolution when you have a crop sensor and stuff, but unless you're going to be blowing up your images to be on billboards, I mean, there really isn't a huge difference. All right, I don't see any more questions. And I just want you guys to know if you ever have any questions, you can feel free to message me on Instagram or on Facebook if something pops up. I think I recorded this. I'm not 100% sure because I've never used Zoom, but assuming I did, I will send you guys the link to it so you can rewatch it because I know it was kind of probably a lot of information to take in at once. That saved me some money, thanks. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, stick with your crop sensor. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a good night and you stay safe and healthy and sane. Yeah, someone said I use Lightroom solely, but I learned a lot of things here. Lightroom is exactly the same as Adobe Camera Raw, and hopefully you saw that with the sliders and stuff. It's the same interface. So everything you learned today, you can do the same things in Lightroom. Thanks guys so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Have a good night. Hi, Julie. How do I stop this? I don't even know. Oh, end meeting. All right. Good night, guys.